So good evening again. My name is Rania Masri, co-director of the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this, unfortunately, very critical issue, data centers and their impact on our lives, on our environment, on our communities. Why are we even giving a webinar on data centers? Data centers are one of these octopus issues that influence every segment of our lives. We may be familiar about the way that they use fresh water and therefore their impact on water in our communities. We may be familiar with the way that they are very noisy and the way they thus impact communities that are around them. We may be familiar with the way that they increase the energy rates and energy cost on all of us, particularly in North Carolina when we are blessed with Duke Energy. We may not be as familiar with how they also increase housing costs and therefore push for gentrification and push for displacement. They also have a very strong relationship with the police and thereby increased surveillance. And very recently, President Trump also uplifted 4 people who are key technical geniuses within the AI world to generals. Very strange. So we are here to talk about data centers, and I am absolutely thrilled that Cassie Rowe and charla Rios reached out to me several weeks ago to ask NCEJN to co-sponsor this webinar with them. Cassandra J and charla Rios are both co-curators of the Against the Machine exhibit in Durham, an exhibit that explores the critical role of the artist in the age of generative artificial intelligence and fascism and climate disaster. Before I hand the floor to them, I do want to briefly let you all know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be shared with you all with a link to our YouTube. Resources that we share on this webinar will also be emailed to everyone who has registered. And as of this moment, we have 146 people registered. Unfortunately, due to a technical difficulty on my side, technical oversight on my side, there is no chat that is enabled. Therefore, I kindly ask you all to please submit your questions in the Q&A that you see at the very bottom of your screen. You can click on the question mark Q&A and submit any questions that you have. We already have the questions that some of you have submitted when you registered, but please feel free to submit any questions or comments in the Q&A. And once again, please accept my apologies for the technical oversight of not enabling chat. And with that, I hand it over to Cassie and charla.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Rania, for that warm welcome and for your partnership. My name is Cassie Rowe. My pronouns are she, her. And as Rania mentioned, this webinar is part of the Against the Machine exhibit programming, which is based in Durham, North Carolina. And so I wanted to share a little bit about that program with y'all before we get started. So charla Rios and I are friends and creative collaborators, and we conceived of this exhibit in late 2024 and early 2025. And at that time, we were learning more about how much energy generative AI and its data centers use and its connection to climate change. At that time, the wildfires were raging in LA, and we were just months out of the devastation of Hurricane Helene in the mountains of North Carolina and in Georgia as well. And of course, Trump was taking his second term in office, surrounded by tech billionaires like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg. So it just started to become more obvious to us that fascism, climate disaster, and AI were all entangled. And we know that artists have a role in uncovering these truths. So Against the Machine came to be. And at this moment, Texas and the Carolinas are recovering from the deadly flooding of Tropical Depression Chantal. And on that note, I do want to send care to everyone here who has been impacted by that flooding. With that said, I'm so grateful that the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, Julie Bolthouse from the Piedmont Environmental Council, and Shaun and William Ingram from the Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Black Empowerment have collaborated with us on this webinar so that we can learn more about the organizing and resistance that's happening in North Carolina and Virginia around data centers. So I'm so excited to hear from y'all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cassie. I'm charla Rios. I also use she, her, or they pronouns, and I'm the other half of the co-curation of the Against the Machine exhibit. We invite you all, if you're here in Durham, North Carolina, to please come and check out the exhibit. It is open on Tuesdays from 2 to 6 while in the month of July. And we have other events coming up as well, so please come. I also have the privilege to briefly introduce Julie Bolthouse. Hopefully you all read her bio, as well as Shaun and Will Ingram's that was in the follow-up link today. But very briefly, Julie is the Director of Land Use at the Piedmont Environmental Council in Virginia. She is a professional advocate for sustainability through thoughtful land use decisions, and Julie has been with PEC for 13 years and holds a BS in fishery science with a minor in watershed management. So I can turn it over to Julie to share her presentation, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much for having me today. Let me go ahead and share my slides. What I'm going to be sharing with you today is a bit of a 101. So I apologize if you do have a more in-depth knowledge, if this isn't enough detail, but hopefully we leave enough time in question and answer for you guys to get to those more detailed questions. Want to make sure you can see my slides before I start. Do you guys see?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Great. So today's presentation, I'm going to go over what is a hyperscale data center, current trends and the state of energy planning in Virginia, the impacts of communities and the environment that we're seeing, and then also just what we see as solutions, ways that we can start to manage some of this. So first of all, what is a hyperscale data center? I want to start with the fact that data centers have changed drastically over time. So in the late 90s, data centers were really a part of most business parks. You had a room that was filled with servers, and it was handling a lot of the on-site data needs of the organization. However, we've moved more towards off-site storage of our data, and we've started to build these massive facilities called hyperscale data centers. And because of that change, we've gotten more efficient with our ability to manage compute and cool and handle the data. However, we've also, with that efficiency, really used a whole lot more. Obviously, Zoom meetings like this are happening all over the place all the time, and so we create a whole lot more data. So what goes into these facilities? They're solely dedicated to management of those servers and data going in and out of them. So some of the aspects of them is the cooling infrastructure. So on this image, there's different types of cooling systems, but on this image, what you see is the HVAC units and the cooling towers on the top of this AWS, which is Amazon Web Services facility. You've got electricity, a whole lot of it coming into the site. All those little green boxes you see around the site are electric lines coming in underground. Then you've got backup power generation, which is usually diesel generators. 99% of the time it's diesel generators. Some of them are gas, but usually for the actual backup power, it's diesel. And those are huge units, as you can see in the image to the side, with the two men standing beside it. They're the size of a train car. And there's dozens of them behind the building managing that backup power. So if power goes down to the site, those diesel generators cut on. And then there's fuel storage on site to basically guarantee a certain runtime for the facility, depending on what the contracts are with the people purchasing space within these facilities. Then you've got security fencing around the data center. And that's just to ensure that people's data is safe and to keep folks out. And so usually there's security guards and there's a guard gate at the entrance. So what is driving the demand for these data centers? Hyperscale data centers, which is your cloud storage providers like AWS, Microsoft, Google, but it's also your co-location data center providers, which is going to be like CyrusOne, Digital Realty, Vantage, some of those other types of data centers where customers actually purchase space within the facility. So it's almost like a storage unit, but it's a storage unit for your servers, and it has a whole lot of electricity that is fed to it. And so you're buying space within that facility and you manage your own servers versus AWS or Microsoft, where they manage your data and you're just, they manage the servers and you just send in your data. So anyways, what is driving that is the outsourcing of information technology functioning to these off-site premises facilities. And then it's advanced smartphone technology. It's expansion of rural broadband, digitization and data storage, and cloud computing. However, I put in orange here generative AI because that is what is driving the boom that we are seeing right now. So we had a steady increase happening from movement of that data storage offsite and from more companies digitizing their information and just generally using more data. But the explosion, the exponential growth that we're actually seeing right now is really coming from generative AI. That's like ChatGPT and a lot of the background generative AI technologies in advertising and other surveillance technology, like we were just, like was mentioned earlier, that sort of thing. These data centers use a ton of electricity, and that is one of the number one problems, one of the number one drivers of impact that we are seeing. What makes them different from other types of uses are these 5 things. So first of all, it's the explosion and growth that we're seeing. This is not normal growth of an industry. This is explosive growth, which has led to a lot of speculation. I mean, we're seeing data center sites, campuses, 11 gigawatts in size. Okay, so just for perspective, the original hyperscale data centers that were in Loudoun County, where I work. So I should have told you I work in a region up in Virginia that is from Loudoun County, which is Northern Virginia, down to Charlottesville, which is Albemarle County. And in Loudoun County, which is the largest data center market in the world, our data centers back in the early 2000s were like 20 megawatts. Okay. 1,000 megawatts is a gigawatt. We are now seeing gigawatt campuses, so 1,000 megawatt campuses, and we just saw a proposal out of Texas for 11 gigawatt campus. 11 gigawatts. That's half of the entire demand of the eastern side of Virginia, which is the most populated side of Virginia. That is an insane amount of power for a single data center campus. So we're talking a lot of speculation, a lot of explosive growth. These buildings are bigger and taller than most other uses that we see, even larger than distribution centers. We're at least in the areas that they're located. Obviously, there's skyscrapers and things like that in the cities. But what I mean is that in the areas that they're located, which is usually suburban areas, they're huge buildings. They use more power than even a steel mill. I mean, these campuses, like I just said, 11 gigawatts, there's no other use that uses anything near that amount of power. They have more on-site backup power than any other type of use. So a hospital has, on-site backup power because they have to ensure that they don't go down. So they have like 3 or 4 generators usually for a hospital, a large hospital. These facilities have dozens of generators. So it's a very different level of on-site backup power. And then also they tend to cluster, which leads to cumulative impacts on your air and water quality, water consumption, and water infrastructure. So let's talk a little bit about energy use and current trends. So like I mentioned, Virginia, we have the largest data center market in the world by far. The blue lines here are all the United States. Orange is the Asian Pacific. And then the EU is green. So you can see that the United States has by far the largest market. Northern Virginia has the largest market, followed by like Oregon and Phoenix and Dallas and Columbus, Ohio, Atlanta, Georgia. Our energy usage at this point, as a percentage of the entire energy usage in Virginia, is over a quarter of our power going to data centers. That's the most of any other place in the world. The only place that I've seen that even comes close to that is Dublin, Ireland, which has a huge concentration of data centers, and they're over 20%. But this really has raises huge concerns for the protection of the rest of the ratepayers. Because if 25% of the entire customer class on the utility is data centers, why do they even care about the rest of the customers? And that creates a really dangerous dynamic in terms of protecting the rest of the customers. We're also importing a huge amount of our electricity from outside of the state, and that's despite the fact that we are building power in Virginia. We've built a decent amount of utility scale solar, but we're also building new gas plants. We have the new Chesterfield gas plant, which is going to be hugely impactful to the community, historically already impacted by coal ash and other energy production facilities down near Richmond. They're going to be impacted by yet another generation plant. And we're also seeing a huge drive towards more energy usage, which is going to drive even more of those fossil fuels, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. But this is the projection that we're looking at for our region. So that gray line on the bottom is energy use over time. And you can see that it's been fairly flat over the last like 20 years. And we've actually seen residential energy use decline slightly, even though there's been population growth, even though we've been building houses. And the sole driver since 2018 of the growth that we are seeing is data centers. We are in this projection going forward, which is more than a doubling of our current peak capacity on the grid. We are looking at EVs, which are a gigawatt of that. And then 27 gigawatts is data centers. Because we very often hear, okay, well, there's a lot of drivers of energy usage and EVs are driving energy. It's only 1 gigawatt of this entire capacity in the projections that Dominion has put forward. What's behind those projections are these contracts that have been signed by the utility. So when a data center comes into a community and it is approved by the community, they then get their, and just so you know, the community doesn't review any of the energy infrastructure. They review things like aesthetics. Does it fit into our plan for the community? What will the traffic be like? And what will the revenue be that comes in from the tax revenue from the equipment within the facility? They don't look at the energy usage. They don't look at the impact on the ratepayer. They don't look at the impact on the climate from building new generation. They don't look at any of that. And when they have their approval from the locality, they just go to the utility, which has an obligation to serve them with power, and they get a contract for that power. So behind the load growth that we are seeing in Virginia is 21 gigawatts of signed contracted power as of July 2024. And within 6 months, we saw a jump to 40 gigawatts of power in these signed contracts. And so that load forecast that we were just looking at of 28 gigawatts isn't even keeping up with the contracts that are being signed. In other words, we're going to see a huge growth in the next forecast coming up. So we've been tracking just to try to help our community better get a handle on what's happening. We've been tracking the data center projects within the state as best we can. This is kind of cloud sourced information. We do go and we validate everything that we receive. We check it, make sure it's in the land use portals. But we are getting it from our community that's a part of the Virginia Data Center Reform Coalition, which is a coalition of about 40 plus organizations that we've pulled together in Virginia to help us kind of get a handle on this issue and to share information with each other so that we can better be organized as we continue to face this explosive growth. But as you can see, there's huge number of data center projects all over the state. The pink dots are already approved existing data centers, and the red dots are Some of them are approved, most of them are actually approved, some of them are still in the pipeline, but they're not built yet. So we've got about 60 million square feet that are in the state existing or being constructed, and we've got 200 million approved or in the pipeline. 200 million square feet, just for perspective, is the equivalent of about 1,400 Walmart supercenters. So it's a huge amount of growth. And that's driven massive transmission line expansions. So this is from PJM's. We put their lines onto a map so that we could better get an idea of where they're going. Those black circles are coal plants in West Virginia. And so we're seeing massive expansions of transmission lines out from where the load growth is in Northern Virginia, where all those red dots are, where all the data centers are, out to coal facilities in West Virginia. And then we've got another a group of even larger transmission lines that was just approved last year. And those also go out to more coal facilities out in West Virginia and then down to nuclear facilities in Virginia, which is the North Anna nuclear facility where they're planning on adding new reactors, and towards Lynchburg where they're planning on building a reactor. Behind a lot of the, because those lines have to go to something that's going to generate power. So one of the things that our regional transmission operator is trying to fast track is gas plant proposals. So this is some of the fast tracked projects. You can see half of them are new gas facilities where we saw a few battery storage, but the vast majority are gas facilities that are being fast tracked through the approval process. And to get fuel to those facilities, we're seeing expansions of gas pipelines to get more fuel to those facilities. So this all has an impact on the ratepayer, like was mentioned at the very beginning. And the reason that has an impact on the rest of the utility ratepayers is because data center customers get discounted rates. They're able to negotiate their contracts in private. They have stronger leverage and influence because they're such a large customer class. That's the 25% that I mentioned earlier about how much of the power they're buying. There's a flawed rate structure that does not really match this new paradigm because their energy usage is 24/7. It's these large load customers that are using that power all the time and driving up base load. It's not driving up peak load, which is what a lot of our rate structure is based on, is the peak load drivers. So it puts too much of the burden on residential when we're actually seeing declines in our energy use. And then transmission lines to solely serve those data centers are being unfairly subsidized by all the other users. And then there's a huge risk being borne by the rest of the customers because the data centers may not actually build out to the capacity that they've requested. They may not fill those buildings with servers at the amounts that they're saying they're going to, because this is a boom. This is an explosive boom. And it's possible we're going to overbuild these facilities. Everybody else is going to be left holding the bag, though, because someone has to pay the bill at the end. So two last aspects I want to highlight, which is air quality and water. First of all, air quality is a huge concern with all of these generators. We have 9,000 generators permitted in Virginia, which is a capacity of 22 gigawatts. So again, a gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts. So this is a lot of capacity. It's basically the entire peak demand of the Dominion area in these generators. And so there's huge potential if there's major outage events for a lot of pollution to be released in a single moment. And then also if they are allowed to be used for demand response during those peak load hours, which oftentimes correlate with our high ozone days. That's huge air quality impacts for our community. And there's been some studies coming out of the University of California about the impacts to air quality. This is actually looking at the permitted levels, and this is just their maintenance of because they have to run these generators every couple weeks to ensure that they'll cut on in an emergency. And so 10% of their permitted levels, which is an estimate for, the amount of time they would run them for maintenance purposes, you can see that that's having a huge health cost on our community. And it's well beyond where the generators are actually located. It's actually having the highest impacts on Montgomery County and Prince George's County and Baltimore. Now, water. Water is a huge aspect as well because we're using water not only in cooling of the IT equipment. Now, just so you understand, some data centers use very little water. Some of them have closed loop systems. Some of them use liquid cooling, direct to chip technology, and they don't use water chillers. They use air cooled chillers. So, I mean, it really varies from data center to data center. But we know that Google, we know that Amazon, we know that many of these facilities do use a huge amount of water based on their own ESG reports, their own environmental, social governance, whatever ESG stands for. Um, Due to their own reports, we know that they're using a huge amount of water. And then, of course, we know from the municipalities that they're using a huge amount of water. And it's not being very well monitored. And then there's also the indirect use of that water for cooling power plants because nuclear plants and natural gas plants both need water very often, depending on the technology, for cooling purposes. Data that we were able to get from Loudoun County just gives you an idea of how much we're seeing being used, how much potable water we're seeing being used for data centers. We are actually really lucky in our community of Loudoun because we have this huge reclaimed water line that was built, long story, but was actually advantageous for the taxpayers. And so it had a benefit for us to actually put a lot of data centers onto that reclaimed water system. But we've gone well beyond the capacity of that reclaimed water system, and we are now actually using the blue stars there are our potable water usage for data centers. And so we're seeing now that our potable water usage has surpassed the reclaimed water usage. And in total, it's about 9% of the total system capacity. And the alarming thing is that a large percentage of that water usage is actually in the month of August and September, which is when the river, the Potomac River, where the water for our community comes from, is generally the lowest. And then we have projections. Again, University of California is doing some really good research on this. We have a lot of alarming projections about how much more water we're going to need as we move towards more AI usage in these hyperscale data centers. And the reason for that is because water has more thermal capacity and can carry heat away from servers more efficiently than air. And so when you have such small spaces that need to be cooled, it is ineffective to use air anymore. And so with these GPU chips that they're using, we have to have direct-to-chip water cooling. And so that can lead to a whole lot more water usage if we're not really paying attention. So in summary, huge cost and risk to the rest of the ratepayers. We are seeing explosive growth that is pushing back our progress towards clean energy future. We're still moving towards more fossil fuels. And then finally, our communities are facing increased air pollution, water supply constraints, and impacts to their homes and public resources like parks. So we do think there's some solutions, and I'm going to go through these really quickly. The first thing, though, is that we have to slow down. This industry is going way too fast. It's following the tech mantra of move fast and break things, and they are breaking things. And the thing that they're breaking is our communities and our environment. So we need to really get this industry to slow down. And the first step in getting that to happen is to increase state policy oversight of this industry. We need to have review of these data center proposals and oversight at the regional and state level rather than just at the local level, because localities do not have the ability to look at the impact to the larger grid. They don't have the ability to look at the regional air quality impacts. They don't have the ability to look at regional water supply issues. Like the Potomac is serving data centers in Maryland as well, but Loudoun County is not looking at that when they approve more data centers. So there's a lot of complexities and we need state review on that. But for that state review to be effective, we have to have transparency. We have to have transparency around their energy usage, their water usage, and their emissions. We don't need proprietary secrets of exactly how they're cooling. What we need is just basic information. We need the industry to be paying their full cost of the energy infrastructure, and we need to have utility tariffs in place to make sure that the ratepayers, the rest of the ratepayers, are not going to be left holding the bag if all of this doesn't pan out the way the industry thinks it is going to. And then also we need to incentivize sustainability and mitigate impacts, which we're not doing right now. We're handing out these huge sales tax exemptions and really getting very little back for them. We also need to see a market push towards reducing data. The image I have here is the AI superhero generator that was really popular like a month or so ago. And that kind of, explosive little hype event has a huge impact on our grid and on our resources. So we need to like stop the excessive like freemium models. I hate to be I guess not very professional here, but really it's kind of like the drug dealer. The first hit's always free, and that's the kind of model that they use to get a lot of our community using these tools. And we need to push back on that because they actually have a huge cost to our environment and a huge cost to our infrastructure and the rest of the ratepayers that have to pay for that infrastructure. So we need to push back on that mantra of, okay, well, giving away a lot of this stuff for free just so they can capture the market. We also need to push for more efficient and smaller software design and AI models. We need to provide tools for consumers so that they can make educated decisions about how they use data. And then also maximizing efficiency through monitoring and data management on site. We need to see more sustainability on site, but this is kind of like secondary to everything else. This is oftentimes used to greenwash, like we'll throw in like, hey, we're going to have some geothermal on site or we're going to throw some solar on site. That's not enough if we're not doing all the other things that we're talking about, but it is a step in the right direction. And we do want to see more of it, especially in that amount of data center space that we still need to that's been approved and that is in the pipeline to be developed. That 200 million square feet of data center space that I mentioned is approved, and in the pipe, most of it is approved and in the pipeline. And then finally, we need to see a stronger state commitment to clean energy and smart grid technology. So we need to make sure that utility scale solar is being built in a way that is respectful of communities and protects our agricultural resources and the rest of our community resources, and that we're supporting rooftop solar and brownfield solar development, parking lot solar. And then retaining net metering so that we can encourage those things. And then finally, innovative grid solutions like advanced conductors, smart grid technology, more battery storage, and virtual power plants. I know that's a lot. Hopefully I didn't take up more than my time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Julie. You are a wealth of information, and yeah, we really appreciate that download, pun intended. So there are some great questions in the Q&A already, and just to let folks know, we will have dedicated time at the end for those. However, Julie, if you do want to respond to any of them in writing in the meantime, feel free to do that. Thanks, y'all, and I'll hand it over to Rania.
Thank you, Cassie, and thank you, Julie. When Cassie and Charla reached out to me as NCEJN to sponsor this work, I immediately thought, well, who in North Carolina can speak about the impact of data centers? And lo and behold, of course, there's none other than the magnificent Richmond Coalition. And the reason we're bringing up the Richmond Coalition here is not only because the Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Black Empowerment is, I think, one of the really inspiring bottom-up organizations that I've come across. But that's not why we invited Shaun and William Ingram to speak. It is because, quite unfortunately, Amazon has set up and is working to build a $13.1 billion data center in Richmond County. So no one is better equipped to speak about this data center than the men who are fighting this data center. So I am thrilled to hand the floor over to Shaun and William Ingram both of whom are the co-founders of the Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Black Empowerment, and both of whom work tirelessly, truly, to champion workers' rights, environmental and social justice, and clean water access. And they do it in a way that's bottom up, steeped in the tradition of Black Workers for Justice. I'm going to put in the chat their longer bio, but I don't want to take any more valuable time from their own speech. So I hand the floor over to Shaun and William Ingram. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Rania, and thank you, Julie, for that. I really enjoyed that information. Charlotte, appreciate you, and Cassie as well. I would like for Rania, can you share that PowerPoint, and we'll start from there. And William, I'll let you give an introduction as well.
You want me to share the PowerPoint that was just?
Thanks, Rania.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we'll do so. Let me just download it.
The introduction. Thanks, Shaun. We are both farmers and retired veterans here in Richmond County, and so it's really important for us to be here and represent Richmond County. So I'm going to pass it back to Shaun when we get this presentation up.
There you have it, gentlemen. It is up there.
Thank you for that. Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Black Empowerment. You know, about the Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Black Empowerment, just a little introduction. The Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Black Empowerment is a grassroots alliance of residents, farmers, and advocates fight for environmental justice, racial equity, and workers' protection through the region. If you notice the wanted sign for Improve Your Foods, that's something that we don't forget coming into this threat or this AI proposed coming into Richmond County. So we want to go over the AI data center and how it's going to impact Richmond County moving forward. So one of the things that we like to come with when it comes to our coalition, understanding its historical value within inside the coalition, and just how big Richmond County is in its founding and its organization, and the reason not so much that people think about data centers and the reason why they're coming, but and Richmond County has a long historical history, right? And this just isn't about the land. This is about our family legacy. And we're going to walk through that as we proceed on this AI data center and its supposed threat. Combating AI data centers, intruders posing as what we call AI or iRobots, right? Our statement, our legal action, with Amazon and its data center intruders. We're preparing legal and community-based action in response to the growing threat. They're also invading rural communities under the guise of innovation while contributing to environmental destruction, labor exploitations, and land displacement. The threat we face. So, a couple of things, right? These AI data centers disguised as technical progress are being placed on and near historical Black lands. As you see, Richmond County was organized in 1779. The history is very important when dealing with what we're looking at here, and some of the information my brother's Will's going to explain without the community input or any consent as to why this deal was made, right? Also, we're going to tell in a little detail the egregious extraction of the land and wealth from the Black landowners. They threaten to drain and contaminate local water sources, right? Which is already happening based off, you have other big industrial pollutants like Purdue and Viva, right? We know that like Miss Julie said earlier, overheat local ecosystems and contribute to toxic emissions that pollute our air. The projects are tied to Amazon's AI expansion, which brings little to no benefit to working class residents, right? Instead, exploiting the land, overworking labor, and destabilizing local economies. They represent a digital colonization of rural communities, prioritizing profit and surveillance over public good. Our response, legal and grassroots actions, right, with exploring legal actions in collaboration with environmental justice attorneys, public health advocates, and civil rights groups. Our legal avenues may include environmental impact challenges, zoning and permitting violations, civil rights complaints related to racialized environmental harm. In 2019, the Richmond County Community Health Assessment that was done by one of the public health educators in Richmond County. When I saw the community report, it was very disturbing at the data and the research and the information that the Richmond County Community Health Assessment provided. Based off the health of the residents and citizens in the county, it was very alarming. So I really recommend, for everyone on the call to take a look at that Richmond County Community Health Assessment alone, without Amazon here or in the room yet. Amazon isn't here yet, and we have a massive amount of pollution that, it's bigger than any level in North Carolina. Richmond County holds every statistic in poverty. They hold every statistic in low income, every statistic in health, and every statistic in cancer, diabetes. There's a slew of things. Next slide, please. How to support. One things that we do in our coalition is that we ensure that we document everything. We have an archival data of all the information, whether it be health assessments, whether it be the information alone from the community. Share information that you may have about, like Ms. Julie was saying earlier, about Amazon's local contracts or water usage or other energy development plans that they have in other areas. One things that you can support the coalition is join our Water Justice Committee and register for the Richmond County Environmental Impact Tour. This environmental impact tour will really bring a on-site on what's going on in Richmond County, but really look at it at a broader scale on, $13.1 billion in Richmond County. That's unheard of. This is massive. Richmond County needs as much as support as it can get. Take action, show up, to our community meetings and hearings. This is our land, this is our water, this is our flight. Also can donate to the coalition. Thank you. Next slide. You also can register for the Richmond County Environmental Impact Tour. You can also register at thecoalitionspeaks.org. On August 9th, we have a Richmond County People's Assembly and brunch. So all the sponsors, all the community, everyone is welcome so that we can take action on this. Next slide. Okay, William, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Shaun. I appreciate that. Let me know if you guys can hear me or if I'm coming in choppy or if I need to slow down in speaking. We're real quick in the chat.
We can hear you.
If you could let me know if you can hear me.
Yeah, you sound clear now.
Okay, great. So I'll just start by saying that I'm not just a concerned citizen, but I'm a descendant of this land, also a farmer and a co-organizer of Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Black Empowerment. I'm also a proud member of Black Works for Justice. And like many of you, I'm tired of seeing our community treated as a dumping ground for other people's profits, right? Today, I want to speak plainly and truthfully about Amazon Data Center. The deal coming to Richmond County is being celebrated by some of our officials, our county commissioners, mayors, all alike, right? It's a $10 billion investment, but behind the curtain of the shiny numbers and the lies, there's much truth. We once, again, being sacrificed for somebody else's gain. And this is a natural pattern for Richmond County, and it's not new at all. Richmond County has a long history of being targeted for environmental harm Generations of communities, especially Black and Indigenous working class families, have been surrounded by these industries that contaminate our air, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soil we grow our food in. One company in particular is Vulcan Materials. They're blasting dynamite from our rock quarry that's nearby in one of our local townships known as Cordova, right? They're shaking the foundations and covering houses in dust silica. We have Purdue Farms and Burlington Industries, where poultry and textile companies and chemicals coat workers in neighborhoods alike. We also have Cascades, the paper mill and pulp mills spewing emissions into our wastewater, right? We have Enviva, a wood pellet plant in Dobbins Heights that pollutes the same air our children breathe. And let's not forget, still present danger of the Charles-Macon Lagoon Superfund site. It was a toxic landfill site from decades ago that still poison our wells today. And that was since the 1980s to be exact. Amazon wants to build a massive data center campus on top of all of this. But what do we need data centers for? All right, what do we really need them for? All right, so we're going to go back to the next point, which is water, energy, silence, and invisibility. All right, water is life, but ours is already poison. These data centers require millions and millions of gallons of water every day to cool their servers. In the county already struggling with contaminated groundwater from the Charles-Macon site and toxic runoff from the industrial farms. This new demand on our fragile water system is dangerous. Our elders, many of whom already buy bottled water just to cook and brush their teeth, they can't afford further strain. Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Black Empowerment has begun conducting self-funded water testing. And we have heard heartbreaking stories from families too embarrassed to speak out, folks being billed for water that they can't even use. We were there the day Amazon and Governor Josh Stein made his big announcement at the Cole Auditorium, right? That told us everything we needed to know. If you're not in the room, you're invisible, right? The power for Amazon and blackouts for the rest of us is what it means. To operate these data centers, Amazon is partnering with Duke Energy on the $13.1 billion energy infrastructure plan that may sound impressive until you realize what it means. It means higher energy demands, new substations, and possibly even rate hikes for local residents higher, which has already happened. Meanwhile, in communities like Ellerbe and Norman here in Richmond County, people are already struggling with reliable power and aging infrastructure. We are not the ones benefiting from this upgrade. We are the ones paying the price. All right. Next thing is the air and the land that we stand on. Let's talk about the air. Many of us already suffer from asthma, respiratory illnesses, and unexplained skin conditions linked to most of the pollutants coming from these factories and these rock quarries. The CDC has long documented the risks associated with long-term exposure to particular matters from the rock blasting, textile fumes, and wood dust. Adding energy demands and construction emissions from a data center only worsens this toxic spew. These are not isolated incidents. They are interconnected by zip code, by race, and by neglect. I come from a long line of farmers and land stewards here in Richmond County. I know what it means to have land passed down from one generation to the next. It's not just property, but it's our purpose. But land in the region is being snatched up and the price has tripled since Amazon deal was announced. Heirs property, much of it is owned by Black families. Now we face gentrification and displacement. Let me be clear, this is not development. This is extraction. We know the game and we've seen it before. This is the same story from Hamlet's Imperial Foods products fire, where neglect, safety standards led to the death of 25 workers in 1991. The same story from the burning of our courthouse in 1889, where records of Black landowners and indigenous people burned and were wiped out. Amazon is just the latest in the long line of corporations looking to take from Richmond County without giving back. They have offered $150,000 in incentives to community investment. That's less than what a single Amazon executive makes in a week. That's an insult to us. We should unite on that alone, right? Our response, we organize, we educate, and we fight. Richmond County, Richmond County Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Black Empowerment, we don't just complain, we organize. We're creating a community health assessment to document the impacts of these industries. We're participating in groups like Blueprint, North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, Clean Water for North Carolina, Key Environmental Consulting, Southern Environmental Law Center, and Black Workers for Justice, just to name a few. We're conducting independent water and air quality testing. We are preparing legal action, like my brother mentioned before, to hold these corporations accountable. And we're hosting monthly Zoom forums and town halls to make sure no voice is left unheard. We will not let Amazon deal go unchallenged, not without public hearings, not without environmental impact studies, not without fighting for clean water, breathable air, and to stay on the land that was descended to us. Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Vision is rooted in law. That's what I like to call it, is law. Land, air, and water. These are not luxuries, they are rights. And we will fight for them like our lives depend on it, because they do. We don't need another corporation giant to tell us what progress looks like. We are already building it, from our gardens to our organizing tables, from our well testing kits and youth programs. And here's some final thoughts for our organization. This land is not for sale. To every official who approved the deal without consulting the people, we see you. To every agency that ignore our complaints about toxic dust and contaminated wells, we will document and expose your failure. To every neighbor who's afraid to speak out, you're not alone. And to Amazon, if you want to build here, you have to do more than just cut a ribbon. You will have to face the people whose land and labor you stand on. And with that, I want to send a thank you to every resident, every elder, every youth, and every ally who's continues to speak out with us. This fight is not about resisting change. It's about choosing the right kind of change. And our story is still being written, but we will not let it be written without justice. Power to the people, power to the land, and power to Richmond County. And I'll yield. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Thank you, Shaun. Truly power to the people. Charla, I hand the floor over to you to direct us with the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Rania. And thank you to William, Shaun, and Julie for your presentations and for sharing time with us tonight. It was really insightful, really helpful, really eye-opening information. And we have a lot of questions that have come in, as well as some pre-shared ones. So thank you all. Please continue to add them to the chat. And we have about 30 minutes or so for Q&A. So we'll get through as many as possible in that time. So I wanted to start off with a first question that I see in the Q&A, and one that's related, that's was pre-submitted, which relates to the process of how data centers come to be in areas. How and why are data centers allowed such land space and access to resources by municipalities through their contributions to economy, or workers, or the ways that they're framed, and what departments are typically involved in signing and approving the contracts for data centers? So I can pose that, Julie and Will and Shaun, based on you all's experience in organizing.
Yeah, I think the number one reason that they are courted by states and by localities is the revenue that they bring in, tax revenue. Depending on exactly how the locality and the state is taxing these facilities, they are potentially able to get a lot of tax revenue from what they call the machine and tools tax here in Virginia, but it varies from state to state. And that's based on all those servers. Those servers are extremely expensive. The chips, the GPUs that are in those facilities are very expensive. And so, and along with the generators and everything else that is on that site. So it brings in a ton of revenue. You also have a declining office space market that is kind of combining with that, and a declining commercial space market as well that is combining with that is really pushing localities to see this as their golden parachute out of that issue, that deeper issue of how do they fund all the things that they need to fund for their communities. All that being said, why are they able to use so much of our resources? And I think that is because of the lack of understanding and a little bit of ostrich behavior, putting our heads in the sand and pretending we don't see things. But the locality, there's a lot of like kind of finger pointing to everybody else. The locality is only reviewing things like traffic impacts and aesthetics of the building. They're not responsible for the broader impacts on the grid, but yet they're the ones who are approving these sites. And so then once that's approved, there is no other state oversight. As far as I know, in the rest of the states, that's the same. I don't think that's just Virginia. And so the problem is that it's nobody's responsibility until it's a crisis. And then all the way up to the federal level, we have an energy crisis that's being declared. And the same thing with water resources. It just, we don't really review how much water they're going to need when we approve them. We just look at that revenue and everything. And then it's the water utilities' responsibility to figure out how they're going to get water to this facility. So I think that's why they're able to use so much resources. And the reason you see so many land developers wanting to develop data centers is because there's this explosive market for it. There's so much demand out there. There's so much profit to be made.
Thank you, Julie, for that. I was going to say this really quick. It's bad in Richmond County to the point where, this data center is coming, but no one in Richmond County, here in Richmond County, almost a large portion of the people don't even have internet, right? So, or access to the World Wide Web. And, that's just, is backwards with AI coming in, the data center coming in, and there's not even access to the internet in the county. William.
So thank you. I'll add to that. One of the main reasons that that these corporations continue to come in and sit where they sit and where they're located is because it's a historical history, and we can't ignore the historical history of where these corporations are sitting. They're in the exact same locations as the old mills, right? So a lot of our old mills from the 1800s already utilized the free energy source. So with Duke Energy leading and spearheading the corporations, it's big corporations bringing in other big corporations. So if Duke Energy can come in first and prove to spaces or corporations like Amazon that, hey, we have enough energy here and it's free, right? And there is no opposition here. There's no opposition, and we can also offer you 50% off of your taxes, or even greater if you can improve the revenue by a certain amount of years. So that's what we're looking at, and that's kind of the reasoning. But like my brother mentioned, we have a lack of education here and a lack of resources and connection to the world, right? This is a really rural area. So believe it or not, like I mentioned in my speech, that some folks don't even have drinking water at this moment. It's already been an issue. It's already been a problem. Right, we receive reports every day and pictures and videos of folks who live and work at these facilities, corporations here, and they go home to dirty water. And most of them are embarrassed about it. And so the biggest problem is education. If we can educate our people, like Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Black Empowerment have been fighting to do, then I think we'd be in a better space. But as long as these corporations like Duke Energy is spearheading it and saying, yeah, hey, we already have a location here. We proved that there's enough free energy that we can provide the energy that it would cost for these data centers to exist. And without that, we wouldn't be here. So I think that we have to look at some of these other corporations that are seeding, right, and planting the seeds for other organizations to come in and displace us. So we really need to recognize our history. And when we learn why and when and how, then we'll know why. So
I also just want to add, Sorry. I also just wanted to add in here because I was thinking about it, and I think it's really important to understand. In Virginia, we have Data Center Alley that is between one of the wealthiest communities in the nation, Ashburn in Loudoun County. And then on the other side of it, you have Sterling, which is actually a fairly low income, high Hispanic, very diverse community. And I think what we're seeing in other places as data center space is moving out into lower income communities is we're seeing the dynamic change a little bit. We're seeing them take advantage of communities using the story of Loudoun County. I very often have seen this repeated, and I think it's something you guys would benefit from, maybe raising awareness of this false narrative that Loudoun County had this golden goose that came, which was the data center industry, and made us wealthy and rich, and we're prosperous, and our streets are lined with gold now. There is a lot of wealthy people here, but it isn't really, I mean, the data centers brought in revenue, yes. But did the tax rate go down? Did the people in Sterling on the other side of the data centers, that low income Hispanic community, really prosper because of the data centers next to them? No. No. What we saw was that governments unfortunately always figured out new ways to spend money. And some of that expenditure was actually on infrastructure to support all the data center development that, we built in the community. So I think it's important to know that there is this false narrative that is being sold to your elected officials that this is going to bring in tons of prosperity. And the other thing is that the tax structure that we have set up in Loudoun County is actually very high on the data center industry, which is way higher than I see in most rural communities like West Virginia with what they've decided to put on data centers is like a fraction. I would suspect maybe you were seeing maybe some of the same stuff in your community. Very small amount compared to what we're seeing in Northern Virginia, because for them to actually be profitable in these other communities away from the robust fiber lines of what I call the Wall Street of the data center industry, which is Northern Virginia, Chicago, New York, where the big data center markets are, the tier one markets, they have to get their advantage somewhere else. And that may be paying less taxes to these communities. It might be going to communities that don't have the resources to fight back, or they're able to trick them into thinking that this is actually going to bring them prosperity. Anyway, sorry, just a side tangent.
And I'll mention one more reason that they're here. I mentioned the rock quarry here. Right, Vulcan's been here since 1960, since Urban Renewal Act was passed. Right, so they're constantly pulling out materials and resources out of there that Amazon and other facilities can use. Right, and so we can't be confused. We're not confused as to why all of these corporations are connected. Right, the rock quarry sits right where there's resources that Amazon can utilize for their cell phones, for their Amazon Alexa systems and things like that. So we can't just look at it and just water. It's our other resources that are being depleted as well, right? And that is what's causing that rock quarry is another thing that's already, it's already contaminated most of the drinking water in our community. So with them being there, they're going to utilize a rock quarry, all of our resources. And, people like myself who own the land here, we don't get any discounts for our taxes. We don't get any, they sell our our land right at the courthouse. If anything, we can't pay our taxes. So a big incentive for corporations to come here is to connect with the county commissioners. And so when they connect with them, obviously they're the ones who are making these deals behind closed doors. So without the heirs being in the room. So if they can get us out of the room, then it's easy for them to make a plan and then do what Governor Josh Stein did to us, right? He, at midnight, is when he said, hey, let's keep this a secret behind the closed doors. And then, we show up, surprise, right? Richmond County Coalition for Justice and Black Empowerment, front row, right? But no one knew why we were there. But if we're not in the room, then we're invisible. And we have to be vigilant on what's going on in our community. So we have eyes and ears everywhere. We have to, because it's our land. If nobody takes the lead, then, we're going to be left behind just like everybody else. But I think we are in a really good place right now. to get ahead of this and to do what is necessary for our communities.
Thank y'all so much for your responses. Shaun and William, I wanted to ask y'all a question. We got lots of questions, both in the ones that folks submitted prior to the webinar, as well as in the Q&A about well water. And so I wanted to know if y'all know what types of contaminants from data centers should folks be looking for, and if you can talk a little bit about the process of well water testing, as well as any evidence that well water can be contaminated even with treatment facilities. And also somebody wrote in ahead of time talking about upcoming data centers off of Lake Norman in Catawba County and Lincoln County in North Carolina, where their family lives. And they're wanting to know, what their family can do when they use well water and worrying about contaminants.
Well, I'll start with the well water here. A lot of our communities were once on well water, and half of them are still on well water. Our biggest issue right now is that we have a rock quarry that's already depleted a good amount of our natural springs and our natural water because it's been there for over 75 years. So if you can imagine that the wells were dug at a certain level, and now the rock quarry is 3 to 4, sometimes 20 times as deep as our wells. So with these communities that are directly adjacent to the rock quarry and places like that, they've been immediately affected, right? And so some of the chemicals one of the biggest things that we found is E. coli recently, which is a real issue. And some people, like I mentioned, they're really embarrassed. So as far as us trying to advocate for them to come forward, and we really have to go into their homes. A lot of these folks are just not willing to voice their opinions because sometimes their living conditions aren't standard, right? And with the county being aware that some of their living conditions aren't even up to standard, they're allowing this to happen, and they're going to continue to allow it to happen because nobody's speaking up. But some of the things that we have found with Clean Water from North Carolina, Hope Taylor has been assisting us with, is to collect that data. And one of the main key things that Shaun hit on is 2019 health assessment. We spoke to the creator of that health assessment, and talking to her about some things, she was pretty surprised that no one picked up what we saw when we read the 2019 community health assessment ourselves. But she put it out just to kind of see if anybody would notice what was inside of the data. And honestly, I can't name particularly some of the things. I'll say one thing is asbestos, right? Because one of the biggest issues getting out in the community and having these community forums, we find a lot of elders who are retired. So one of our main elders was retired from the water treatment facility. And one of the main issues that he brought up was the fact that they can replace the plumbing to the house or on the street, or the pipes, that run correctly to the house. But the issue is at the source. Our water treatment plant is so old that at the source is asbestos coming from the source. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint one particular thing that's in our water at this point without really getting out here in the community. That's how we're promoting our self-water testing, establishing our own community health assessment for the coalition, so that we can get out and show the folks, because they don't trust anybody in our county right now. Many of these people are our family members. So with them being our family members, that really does have a lot of leadway into being able to speak to these elders. And they're just not willing to allow people to come into their houses to do these testing. So we've been able to break that barrier through education and through weekly forums, our Zoom forums, which we now went to monthly. But that's the only way we've been able to really engage in the community and get them to kind of advocate for us to advocate for them. So I think that's really important. But the main source, that 2019 health assessment was just posted into the chat. Thank you, Rania. But it's really important, if you guys get a chance, you can kind of look at it and see what it is. Another issue is that our actual person who does the water testing from the public water department. Um, he's been referring back to 2016 for a lot of tests that should have been annual, right? So if you look at the 2019 and 2024 health assessment, you'll notice the same thing, that he's using data from 2016. And some of these things are supposed to be done annually or every 5 years. So that's what we're trying to establish, is a baseline right now at this moment, so that we can see what our levels are at right now, as opposed to if any other corporations like Amazon do come in. So we'll have at least a base to start at. And a lot of our other organizations here in Richmond County have already had some data collected. So that's one thing that we're doing right now, is organizing with the rest of those community organizations to gather that data and put it in the coalition, so that the coalition has all the data for each one of these 7 townships that we're aware of in Richmond County. And it's not as big as we think it is. Richmond County is 477 square acres. So we can drive it in an hour. That's the reason why Shaun's talking about the environmental tours. If anybody's interested in coming down and kind of seeing exactly what it is and getting an idea of what it looks like, it's only an hour and a half tour. We'd love to have all of you on it.
Thank you, William. I think, yeah, keeping with that theme around organizing, we've gotten some questions both about organizing from the inside. So if someone has an IT or tech job that may be related to AI, are there ways that they can organize or contribute to this work from the inside, as well as things like tools? I think one person mentioned a calculator, maybe a user-friendly impact calculator as an organizing tool. So if you all can talk about means or ways of organizing, both if you have a tech-related job or an IT-related job, and if you are a community member that you haven't talked about already.
So, in terms of a tech job, there's groups within like Google, AWS, and Microsoft that are, like employees that are actually focused around sustainability or climate action. So, like one of the ones I know of is Amazon Employees for Climate Progress. I think that's what the title is. But there's a similar one for Google as well. And so there is opportunities to do that within the space. It is a risk though, because I mean, the more you are a whistleblower from within, the more you potentially get pushed out as not being on board with the the hype and the boom. Because to do that, you have to ask real questions. The other thing is there is groups like that are focused on green ops, that are focused on like more sustainable or making smaller AI models and more sustainable software packages, things like that. There's iMasons, which is a kind of a group of folks who are focused on sustainability within the data center space. A bunch of different companies are represented in that space. So there is those groups out there. I would also say though, there's a lot of people who are very vocal, myself being one of them, but there's lots of other people, especially from like the UK, that are very vocal on sustainability within the data center space and within the AI space. So there's podcasts out there. There's people you can connect to on LinkedIn. A couple podcasts I'd suggest is like Wired, or the Uncanny Valley, I think is what they call it on the Wired podcast. And then there's like Ed Zitron and folks like that. But the other thing in terms of what do you do in terms of community organizing? We have put together like fact sheets. We have videos. We've worked with a lot of people who are volunteers within our communities to put together social media kind of packages, campaigns, things like that. It is tough though, because there's so much going on. I mean, beyond this issue, there's so much else going on as well in terms of social justice. And I don't want to get into that because I'm a 501c3, so I'm not allowed to have opinions. But, there's a lot of issues out there. And so you're competing against all those other things. But yeah, fact sheets, they're really helpful. And just, word of mouth on social media, those sort of events, town halls, webinars like this?
Well, I think one of our biggest successes is just our forums, right? Our weekly forums, and just kind of putting it out there on Facebook and different media sites. And then also getting out into our communities and passing out brochures or creating them from us so that way people recognize the data when it's actually coming from, the source and from the people then, so they can relate to it a lot better. So if you can create that kind of media and data and newspapers, right, so that folks in the community can actually see it for themselves. And biggest thing that we do advocate for is getting out in the community and passing these things out directly. Because if you get out and talk to people directly and give them information, and sometimes just leave it with them, it makes it a whole lot better for them to understand what's happening in their community. So I think us creating a newsletter here in Richmond County has been very helpful, getting the information out, especially when they see specific names of people in the community that they recognize and elders that they see in our communities that are actually stepping up and saying, hey, this has been an issue. It is an issue, but I didn't know that there was people like the coalition that was aware of it. So we have to present ourselves first and kind of make sure that people see us and that we're visible. And once we become visible, I think everything else kind of falls in line. But I think just getting out here and doing the work, like Miss Julie said, it's not easy. It's really not an easy task to kind of get people to see where they are presently, because the biggest issue we all have is kind of looking in the mirror at ourselves, right, and seeing what's wrong and what's happening. So once we can acknowledge that and get people to acknowledge that they don't have to accept dirty water and contaminated water. And that was one thing that one of my neighbors came and said, is that, oh, so I deserve clean water. And I was really shocked that she didn't even think that she deserved it, right? And she pays for the water every day. And so I told her, I said, yeah, you deserve clean water. Your mom deserves clean water. Everybody here in Richmond County deserves to have clean water, and we have to advocate for that, because water is the source of life. And once that source is contaminated, everything else goes with it. So we got to protect it. And that's why it's so important for the coalition to make sure we're advocating for clean water, clean air, and clean land. So I say, just get out into the communities, do as much as you can, start small. That's what grassroots, like Rania said, from the ground up. We have to be the feet on the ground for other people. Our elders in the communities are getting older. And as they get older, we have to advocate for them, because they no longer have the voice that they had when they were our age. And so we have time. And so as long as we have time, as long as we do one thing at a time, just one small thing, it'll lead up to a bigger picture. And hopefully we can get this resolved as a team and as a coalition together.
Thanks, y'all. We have a limited amount of time left, and I know we won't be able to get to all of the questions. I am going to ask one more, and I think that we can follow up with the attendees trying to answer the rest of them. Julie, have you had the opportunity to review any disaster management plans for these data centers in case of a catastrophic weather event, if that occurred where the data centers are located, and what impact does their energy use have on communities' ability to respond to disaster?
Honestly, no. I've never really. So one of the things we always hear about in the data center, like hotspot of Northern Virginia, is, well, what if we're a target for being bombed because we have so many data centers in this space? Are we a terrorist target? Um, that being said, the response from the data center space is, don't worry, we would just send all of our data from our tier one market to our tier two. We have all these fiber lines. That's the great thing about Northern Virginia, is we can just transfer all the data. It's always funny because they don't say anything about all the houses that would also be a part of whatever just got bombed. So they're not really worried about us. They're just worried about the data moving. But anyways, the likelihood, though, I've actually talked to, because we are in such close proximity to DC, I've had the advantage of being able to talk to some people in national security. And what they actually say is that's not really a very big risk. The bigger risk is the grid. It is the reliability of the grid. And honestly, the data centers are putting more of a security risk on us because they're straining the reliability of the grid. They're making those outage events that much more likely to occur because there's so much strain on single substations, so much strain on single corridors for transmission lines that if a major substation were to go down, it would have catastrophic outage. It would likely wind up being, you know, a pretty large outage event for the entire region. And then you also have the health implications that would come along with that from all those diesel generators cutting on as well. So I don't have a response for disaster recovery, but I think disaster is definitely something people are concerned about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Shaun and William, did you have anything to add about how the data centers' energy usage could potentially affect disaster management and response to disaster?
I'll say this. I don't know, haven't done the research, but what I do know is that I anticipate, but not necessarily. And what I do know, data center hasn't came to Richmond County yet, so it hasn't came, so we can't really make any prejudgments to say that it's going to come. But what I will say is what I know and understand from my own experience, having lived in California at one moment, that those rolling blackouts will happen.
Mm-hmm.
They will happen. And what concerns me that if this threat does finds itself in our home, um, the residents there, they're not used to, they don't understand this type of blackout or things like of this nature. They're not used to it. So it's going to be, not saying that it's going to be catastrophic, but, education has to happen. People were just not used to, a rolling blackout at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, all the way until 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or whenever they decide to turn the electricity back on. And also understanding that some people may not have access to, um, 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 uh, their oxygen tanks. There's a lot of issues that we can speak of, but there need to be a disaster plan. I appreciate you for that, and it's something that the coalition is definitely going to look into. William.
So I'll add real quick. I know, but just real quick to that, right? With those rolling blackouts that might happen, during COVID, that was a big issue, and that was a big eye opener for a lot of people in our community, especially the elders. But with these rolling blackouts, and with us already having an issue with a high majority of our residents here with cancer and dialysis. My issue is what happens. The biggest question is what happens when these rolling blackouts do happen, and we have elderly members that are living in their house, and depending on what time of the year it is, if it's winter or if it's the summertime, and these blackouts happen, how do we mediate? That's things that we're thinking about. How do we mediate and remedy those issues by generators or whatever sources that we have to use? Right? And we know that solar energy and solar power is not that it adds to the contamination blueprint or footprint. And so that's what we're thinking about and trying to figure out now in this moment is how do we protect those elders and those folks who are in situations that they can't for themselves if this does happen at any point. So that's where we are right now, is trying to get ahead of it and stay ahead of it on how do we advocate for these folks who already experienced COVID, and that was really traumatic for them. So, TS or PTSD is a real thing for me. So, but to notice my elders and the people in my community having PTSD today from COVID, which is not even something that is talked about, that's even another problem, right? So with this, that it's a real concern for us.
Thank you all so much. Oh, sorry to interrupt you, William. Thank you all so much. This has been such a fruitful discussion. If you all are open to it, I would invite y'all to share your emails or where folks can reach you and follow you. And to the participants, thank you all so much for your great questions. And we will follow up with answers to the remaining ones. And I'm going to hand it over to Rania to close us out.
Thank you again to all the panelists, to William and Shaun Ingram, to Julie Bolthouse, and to Charla and Casey for the very idea behind this webinar and for the work that you all are doing with the art exhibit. I do want to say that there are certain things that we do know. We know that there will be more storms. We know that there will be hotter summers. And we know with both of these that we're going to have increased demands on energy. We also know, quite unfortunately, that state after state after state in the United States has proven itself not to have a disaster plan. North Carolina, we know this very well. So just based on what we know, we can expect things to be much worse with the presence of these data centers. It is critical what we know. It's also critical what we don't know. And there were lots of excellent questions that were posed, raising issues as to what are the things we don't know about data centers, including how best do we organize with labor unions and with others who are at the front lines facing this monster. I want us to think about all these questions and for us to think about what are the steps forward that we want to do. And know this, that we are stronger when we organize together. At NCEJN, data centers are going to be a prime issue in our annual summit, so please reserve the date, October 17th and 18th in Whitaker, North Carolina, to come out to our summit. Between now and October, please continue to reach out to us so we can make sure, how do we support each other? What kind of strategy meetings should we have? What kind of support can we give each other? What are the questions that we need to be raising? And how do we make sure that the decision makers that approve these data centers are at the very least uncomfortable? With that, I thank you all. We will be sending you all those who are present, as well as those who registered, a list of resources, including the contact information for the panelists. We hope that you do come out to the art exhibit in Durham, and please stay in touch with us all. Have a wonderful evening and stay away from ChatGPT.
Thank you all.
Thank you
Bye.
all. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys. Wonderful webinar.
Peace.